Hello everyone, Mark here, and today we are doing the first entry in the 6 Principles of Training series, covering the 6 Principles of Training by Kondo Katsuki Sensei, translated into English by Derek Steele. The original texts that we will be covering through the series can be found in the book right behind me, Daito-ryu Aiki Jujutsu Hiden Mokoroku Ikkajo. I will be adding in the description to this video a link to Koryo.com where you can find a free copy of the text that we will be covering. Today we will be covering rei, or correct formal personal conduct. I will do a first full reading of the paragraph that's attached to the principle, after which I will be I'll rewind and I'll go back to the first sentence and do a sentence by sentence breakdown, adding some additional information, context, and so on to each sentence part of this paragraph. So without further ado, let's get started. Rei, correct formal personal conduct. The term rei has been translated variously with words such as etiquette, manners, courtesy, decorum, respect, or propriety. However, rei may be generally understood to mean the rules of correct formal personal conduct. Historically in Japan, such rules have served in lubricating social and interpersonal relationships and preventing strife among people. Daito-ryu preserves historical forms of correct personal conduct, not because they have any particular relevance to the performance of the techniques per se, but because they contain and continue the spiritual mindset of the traditional warrior that pervades and informs the Daito-ryu tradition even today. So that's the text that we'll be covering today. Let's rewind quickly and start to do a sentence by sentence breakdown with additional comments for each portion. First, the term rei has been translated variously with words such as etiquette, manners, courtesy, decorum, respect, or propriety. It's a good lexicon to draw from whenever trying to convey the ideas and concept behind rei. If we're speaking textual translation, that's probably one of the words that you would end up using depending on the context. It is important to keep in mind that a lot of Japanese terms with strong cultural, historical roots are often going to be very hard to translate with a single term. It may end up depending on the context, and often you're going to have a meaning that's going to fall mostly in between a series of words and not specifically on a particular one, given any language you would like to do a translation to. So that's a pretty good breakdown. I think etiquette is probably the term that we will hear being the most frequently used when speaking of rei, but I think decorum is very much is probably one of my favorite here, with respect as well. I would probably add 2 terms to that lexicon myself. I would probably add protocol and cultural artifact. Protocol because we're speaking about a ceremonial sequence of event, often a ceremonial sequence of event that is meant not only to convey respect, but also to basically ensure, safety, security, and the ability to respond of, if not all parties equally, of all parties to a certain degree. From the way you're bowing to each other to just how you start class, you can see a lot of indication of that, basically, right? But even if you want to take Western examples, and we're going to get back to that also when we're speaking of cultural artifact a little bit, but when you're speaking about a handshake or even a military salute, right? Those are things that are said to come from, basically, yes, showing you respect, but, ensuring that, when shaking hands, you show that you do not have a weapon in your hand by basically, offering it for a handshake. And when it comes down to the military salute, it is said to come from, the action of raising your visor on a full-plated armor helmet. So to both basically, enhance your vision to be able to see better who you're surrounded by, but also to basically make it easier for others to identify you, because without the visor, your face becomes exposed and it's easier to see who you are. Now that transform into what we know today, we've seen in movies and clips and so on, in the military. And that's where the second term comes in, cultural artifact, right? Where does this salute come from? Well, it is very ceremonial in nature, I think. Yes, you are paying your respect, but it's not, other than that, it doesn't necessarily serve any battlefield purpose. Quite on the contrary, actually, today. But it does enshrine some culture. It is an act that basically keeps on conveying and carrying some historical and cultural knowledge, and as such, basically has value in terms of really not only preserving but inculcating the culture to practitioners, right? And it's the same thing for Daito-ryu. I mean, although some of those practices are arguably still found in some ways in modern Japanese society, I think for a foreigner that doesn't live in Japan, that is it's a lot more ceremonial in nature than anything else. Which does raise an interesting point here. I think for many practitioners that I've met abroad, it does feel like that ceremonial part and like the prettiness or peacefulness of the act is what a lot of people seem to notice far more than the aspect of making sure that not only you're paying your respect in the proper way, but you're also making sure that on one hand, you act in a way that would not bring the escalation of a situation to a situation of aggression, violence, and conflict. While at the same time, basically, and that I think is more specific to the concept of rei as found in martial practices and martial arts, but basically to act in a way that both preserves your situational awareness and helps you maintain readiness. So basically the ability to respond to a situation. So there's quite a few things to balance up at the same time here, and it's not just about form without function, essentially, right? Or form with pure auxiliary function. Let's continue. However, rei may be generally understood to mean the rules of correct formal personal conduct. I think I hinted to that in the last sentence, but it's important to think about it in a few other ways than just, well, this is what I'm doing. So first of all, you may be doing this as part of a group, right? And the person to which you will be paying respect or visiting or whatnot, it might be a single person or it may be another group. So while you are essentially in charge of your own personal behavior, it quickly expands to, potentially managing the behavior of your own group and managing the response of another group, right? So yes, it is fundamentally about personal conduct, but it quickly ramifies into, people versus people, essentially. So that's number one. Number two, I think that through the study of rei, you're meant to also, become more sensitive to lack of respect and individuals being disrespectful. It's interesting in Japanese that you have essentially two different terms for that. So you have burei and shitsurei. Shitsurei is, I guess, could be more easily translated into active lack of respect, being disrespectful, whereas burei is more not following the proper etiquette whenever the situation arises. So it's basically, missing the opportunity to be respectful, I guess would be one of the way you could translate that. Now, in terms of, martial arts practice, and I think it's very true in the case of Daito-ryu, someone, being able to quickly detect somebody lacking respect or being disrespectful can definitely help in the preservation of your own personal safety, right? So on one hand, so it's basically situational awareness providing and supporting personal safety essentially, right? That brings a point that to me is of importance, of probably utmost importance for early practitioners of Daito-ryu, is that all of this connects essentially to the focus on paying attention to details. And that is especially true for foreigners. Now, when you're a Japanese person, you come into a Japanese dojo, you don't know what you're getting yourself into necessarily, but you have an idea of the intensity and the level of difficulty that it will involve, right? At the same time, you also know, some of the basics. Most of the people are going to be able to sit in seiza, decently well. They're probably not going to know how to bow properly as per Daito-ryu custom, but that's fine. It's something that they can learn relatively quickly. And most importantly, they don't suffer a language barrier. So when somebody instruct them in Japanese and instruct them about the cultural background behind certain acts, well, that instructor or senior is going to convey the information and it's going to be understood directly, right? And there's not going to be any translation involved or whatnot. So there's less barrier to that, right? But as a foreigner, you don't have access to a lot of that, so you really have to pay attention. And a lot of the cultural advantage is basically gone. So you're going to have to pay even more attention to make sure that you kind of watch what others are doing in the dojo and kind of behave according to what you've noticed about what other people are doing at any given point in time, right? Today is not just about like bowing and sitting and so on and so forth. It's about how to conduct yourself at any given point in time. So if you want to make sure that you do things the proper way, then there is no choice. You're really going to have a heightened state of attention at any given point in time, from the beginning of the training all the way up until the end. Let's continue. Historically, in Japan, such rules have served in lubricating social and interpersonal relationships and preventing strife among people. That's to put it lightly. I mean, people would probably quickly get into skirmish fights, conflict at any given moment. Some of it wasn't necessarily because people were genuinely offended. I think it's just because people saw an opportunity, and basically somebody lacking respect just gives them the excuse for throwing the first punch, so to speak. But regardless, it's important to keep in mind that there was a time of Japanese society where things were pretty explosive. During the Edo period, that was probably not as problematic. I mean, I think security concerns were definitely something that was on everybody's mind. Starting war was less of a concern at the time due to social control of the Bakufu. But still, I mean, the how seriously I think Rei was taken in Japan is very much a side effect of warrior culture and the concept and idea that even the slightest action can have grave consequences, essentially. Let's continue. Daito-ryu preserves historical forms of correct personal conduct, not because they have any particular relevance to the performance of techniques per se, but because they contain and continue the spiritual mindset of the traditional warrior that pervades and informs the Daito-ryu tradition even today. So the two parts here that I think are key is the question of relevance to the performance of techniques per se, and the continuation of the spiritual mindset of the traditional warrior. Rei doesn't inform techniques, but it definitely informs kata. a quick side note: there are some kata that I've seen in the past that were said to be of Daito-ryu, that just looking at their execution would be basically demeaning to the person on which the technique is executed, at least from a cultural standpoint, a historical cultural standpoint. And by that, it's just looking at that, it feels unlikely that those kata were ever part of Daito-ryu in any way, shape, or form. Simply because, people would not really feel like demeaning themselves for the purpose of practice like that. Sitting on someone, even today, is not very respectful, right? That kind of things. But even beyond that, the execution as part of the practice is definitely informed, I think, by Rei. So, the way you stand and compose yourself, before and at the beginning of the kata, and how you get back to your position, your starting point at the end of the kata, it's definitely informed by Rei, I think. Obviously, all the other principles that we're going to be seeing through the series, have a great level of importance, but it's very much underpinned by how you compose yourself and how you don't add wood to the fire, essentially, right? You don't you basically, if not de-escalate, make sure that the situation doesn't escalate further by your personal conduct and composure. The other aspect that's also important here is that it's meant to continue the spiritual mindset of the traditional warrior. So, the idea, again, being that, your Rei is something, again, that you do throughout the practice. It's not like, well, we bow at the beginning, we bow at the end, we bow every time we change partner, and that's it, right? That's not what Rei is. Rei is everything from, how you move in the dojo to, avoiding passing in between two people to, there's tons of examples I could think of, walking, if you have to go somewhere and there's somebody in the way, you don't pass in front of them, you pass behind them, that kind of stuff. And it's that idea of being always mindful, essentially, and keeping situational awareness, essentially, is the more practical, if you will, the more practical benefit of cultivating that kind of mindset. So it's very much throughout the practice. It's not something that's just purely ceremonial that you do at some point and then, it's just done for historical reasons and whatnot. It does actually kind of, cultivate a mindset, and that is very much core to the practice. A few last words. Like I just said, I think Rei is, I would go as far as to say that it is foundational to the practice of Daito-ryu. In the sense that, if I'm still doing the research work right now, but it does very much look like much of the Daito-ryu, let's call it an Eiho, basically comes from Oshikuchi, and it's still very early work. I'm hoping to find more information in the future, but there's some documents that I stumbled upon that seem to indicate that it was a lot about how to behave in the palace, but basically how to make sure that people were safe, and at the same time that the proper level of respect was given to every parties involved. And if you look, there's a lot of stuff that starts from Midori that clearly looks like it's meant to simulate an attack from attacking someone that's sitting down. It's not exactly something you would from a standing position. It's not exactly something that you would see in a lot of other situation, I think, no matter what the era you might have in mind. But regardless, I think it is foundational to Daito-ryu simply because of that aspect of maintaining composure, maintaining a good front, if you will, but also making sure that you maintain safety at all time and situational awareness. It is a subject also that I could go on. When discussing the subject, you could go on the subject for a very long time if you actually pay attention to the details. At the Shinbukan Dojo, when I entered, I think I probably spent the first 2 weeks on Reiho, with a little bit of practice in between, like Ippondori, and that's it. But while seemingly rather boring, it definitely helped crystallize and basically set up a certain mindset that allowed me to understand the practice through very different eyes. So I'm pretty grateful to have gone through those first few weeks in the way that I have. Maybe the best way to kind of crystallize the perspective that I have and how I approach it would be to tell a quick story that happened just the other day. As a matter of fact, I was visiting another dojo, another different branch dojo. Most of the practitioners I hadn't met yet. It had been a while I hadn't met the branch chief. I just wanted to go there and train a bit and just get to discuss and take the pulse of things over there. And on that day, it happened to be that there was a newcomer. There was basically somebody starting their Daito-ryu practice, doing their very first day. And the branch chief asked if I could take care of showing that person, basically showing the ropes to that person. And, that normally means teaching proper reiki. So basically how to enter, leave the dojo, how to properly walk, how to properly stand, sit, how to go from standing to sitting to standing. A whole bunch of guidance and pointers on how to generally behave in the dojo. And I knew that the branch chief wanted to give some sense of what the rest of the practice is to the individual. So, unlike at the Shinbukan, basically that instructor wanted to make sure that, there would be a little bit more practice involved and, just also partnering up with a few more people within the dojo instead of just being stuck with, that foreigner guy in the corner. But still, it took... it was a speed run, but it took 15-20 minutes to cover everything. So everything from proper motion and the important details and their significance, basically, right? And a lot of it is kind of when you're told, it's like, oh, it makes sense. The rationale is rather logical, but you still need to go through that, and it still take a bit of time. If you really want to make sure that you go through both the form, which is arguably rather idiosyncratic to Daito-ryu, but also the function, meaning, why do we do things a certain way? A good example in this particular case, generally an ideal dojo structure will make it so that you have the entrance to the dojo on the back wall or shimoza. The reason being that you want to create as much distance between the entrance through which intruders might be coming in and the front of the dojo, which is generally where you're going to have the little portable shrine on the kaminara. So this is considered of great value generally to the dojo and to the tradition. And then you're also going to have your branch chief or sensei at the front. Your seniors are going to be also closer to the front, and then from the front to the back you're going to go from senior to junior, in the same way that in a sitting order you would also have senior to junior from right to left, and right to left being basically that the Joseki and Shimonoseki basically are meant to be position of highest importance to position of lowest importance. Now that specific dojo was set up in a way where, in the training hall really was set up in a way where the entrance to the dojo was on the right wall, close to the kaminara, which is not ideal because you're not creating as much distance, right? But it had the benefit of making it so that you didn't have to change how you would enter and leave the dojo. Now you enter from the left, you leave from the right. The logic being you do not want to show your back to positions of importance. Showing your back basically could be interpreted as I'm hiding something, doing something that you cannot see, and then suddenly I pull out something or whatnot, right? So generally you want to make sure that you do not hide. So it's the same reason why it's considered, bad form to put your hands in the vents on the side of your hakama, because you're essentially hiding your hands, right? But so same kind of logic here. Now being on the entering through the Joseki wall basically makes it so that logic doesn't change, because the position of importance being the front, you want to make sure that you're not showing your back to the front, so you enter with your left, you leave with your right. If you would be entering through the opposite wall, through the Shimonoseki wall, then that would be a different position, arguably, because you would want to enter from the right and leave from the left instead, again, to make sure that you are not hiding your front. And in this particular case, you also want to make sure that you provide maximum visibility on your weapon side, I presume. So making sure that if you start to touch your weapon, that it can be perceived by anyone else in the dojo potentially. That is that kind of logic, is that kind of mentality that basically is bred through the study of property, right? And again, like you've seen here, it's not just limited into a single ceremonial action. It's really connected to a entire set of behavior meant to, yes, convey respect, but also ensure situational awareness is maximized and safety is optimum. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the explanations here. Next time we will be covering metsuke, or eye contact or gaze. If you have any question or comments regarding the content of this video, please feel free to put them down in the comments. Thank you for your time, and until next time.